Okay, so moving into the Civil War, I thought it'd be a good idea to give a little quick background on General Grant and how he became the overall commander of the Union Army during the Civil War. So most of this we will go into detail in full in class, but I just thought I'd give a quick little background so some of these terms are familiar with you and you understand how sort of the leadership of the Union progressed. So at the very start of the war, you see President Lincoln come up with a plan of aggression, essentially, because President Lincoln at this time was a very smart man and forward thinker, and he understood that in order to beat the South, the Union had to be the aggressors and set the tempo in the war. Now, this was problematic because if you look here, these were the first four main generals of the Union Army, and what a lot of them lacked was this same vision that Lincoln would embrace. So they would just lack pure aggression. Now, don't get me wrong, most of these men do have a lot of accomplishments and do deserve respect and acknowledgement for their contribution to the war. But overall, a lot of historians, and if you look it up more and stuff like that, and we'll go over in class, a lot of these men probably could have ended the war a lot earlier and had different outcomes had they been aggressive. I mean, look at over here, General Meade. We'll learn about Gettysburg. Gettysburg is one of the most important battles of the entire war, and he arguably could have won the war after that one if he would just been more aggressive and counterattacked General Lee, but instead he chose to hold up and just set up more of a defensive stance, which is something all four of these men were guilty of doing, more defensive rather than aggressive. So that's one of the issue with Lincoln, one of the issues he had with these men, and that's why you see him go through one very quickly until we get to General Grant. So just going off that, this is where, if we jump ahead here, this is where we can start to run into, at this point in the war, a colonel who did share the same vision with Lincoln that the Union must be aggressive tempo setters in the war if they want to have success, especially against the very skilled generals that the Confederacy would have, that being of General Lee and Stonewall Jackson, which we'll go into later on in class. But something that Grant also had very high knowledge of that the Union needed to do is he understood that they needed to control the Mississippi Valley, and that would help cut the Confederacy in half. Now, a lot of you probably aren't familiar with the Mississippi Valley, so right here, if you look on this map, these areas of Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky, basically the states that really mostly rely on the Mississippi River at this point, Grant, that is, understood that these were very important states, that if he controlled these, it would kind of divide the Confederacy into two sections, the coastal and the landlocked ones. And from there, you can then have a sort of a two-front war that would help with the attacks and kind of offset the weaker tacticians that would dictate the war here. But just going back to Grant, so one of the first key battles that we see of him that really puts him on the map is the Battle of Shiloh. And with the Battle of Shiloh, this is where, as the Union Army over in the Western Theater, we see them get surprise attacked one night, and this pushes them back as they have to kind of fall back into a retreat, as they weren't ready for a battle at all, as they had just gotten into position, were still setting up, had just got long marches back in this time. So this really hurt them and hampered their ability and pushed them back. And here's where we first see General Grant kind of come onto the scene and show that he's got the aggressiveness that Lincoln wants, because as his troops rally back up and he notices the heavy blow they just took, he realizes he could be defeated at any minute if another attack occurred. So what he does is he rallies all of his troops and he counterattacks, doing exactly what the Confederates did to them, and launches a surprise attack. However, Grant realizes that he has larger numbers still, as most battles in the Civil War are fought the Union usually outnumbers the Confederacy so heavily. So he counterattacks, and we see him push the Confederates all the way back, and this is one of the early wars of the war, one of the early wins of the war, and really catches the eyes of a lot of generals, especially and Lincoln, who was very impressed. He finally found a man who can fight, as you see the quote up top. So that's kind of putting Grant on the map there. But then his most famous battle, though, is probably that of Vicksburg's there. So Vicksburg is a siege warfare type of a battle, where siege warfare is where you surround the enemy when they're kind of in a defensive position. So a town, for example, which Vicksburg is, and he just kind of cuts off the... show you a map here. So on this map, you see Vicksburg right here in the middle. And while Grant starts up here on the top left, you see how he works his way down, capturing the river, crosses up, takes out his positions, and then you just surround the city now that you have the river and the main supply route. And then it's basically just a weight game at this point. And it really puts a game of attrition, essentially, on the Confederacy. And this, though, is one of the more controversial battles you'll see in a lot of wars, because President Grant, or General Grant at this time, decided to actually fire into the city of Vicksburg itself, unleashing a sort of a new type of warfare known as total war there. And essentially what total war is, we see is it's a type in which the normal rules don't apply to battle. There's no real restrictions involving destruction. So whether it's civilian houses, military complexes, it's all fair game to them. As long as it helps you win, it's okay to destroy or damage, stuff like that. So it kind of opens up a new wave, and we'll go into a lot more detail on that, especially in World War I and II, where it becomes even more popular of a fighting style. Also something to note during going back to Shiloh and Vicksburg here, that General Grant is often considered a man of the people amongst his troops. He's very well respected, and he's a man who doesn't enjoy the higher things in life. He's more of a, camp with the men, drink with the men, stuff of that nature. Career soldier, and he just enjoyed that style rather than personal tents and catering too. So that's another thing to really remember about Grant, is just he was a man of the people and highly respected amongst the ranks. But let's just jump ahead real quick to when because with those two he had gained a lot of recognition, especially with Lincoln. So Lincoln promotes him to overall commander of the Union Army, and this is where we get a two-prong attack set up with Sherman. Sherman had always kind of been under him in the war. It's a man he highly trusted. And with him, he sets up a two-prong attack using Sherman. And this will be Sherman's famous march to the sea using scorched earth, which we will go into heavy detail in. It's highly scrutinized strategy. Essentially what that is if you look on this map, you'll see this is still the Mississippi Valley. So it'll have Sherman essentially start up here around the Tennessee area as they would fight down and just march to the sea. And scorched earth is a highly controversial tactic. It's where you literally destroy the land as you leave it, because you don't want the enemy to have those resources. So I'm talking railroad tracks being destroyed, crops are being burned, houses, infrastructures. So we'll go into a lot more detail, but that's basically just a overall thing. But so Grant will be up here by Virginia. So this march to the sea and two-prong attack will have Sherman going to the sea to cut him off that way, and then go up north and essentially flank him from the rear, while Grant chases Lee up north, and they put him into a pinch down there in Richmond, Virginia, to a degree. So that's pretty much how Grant kind of got his power and used his knowledge and Sherman to kind of launch a two-front attack. So we'll go into much more detail on all this in class, but that's just kind of a overall scheme and some few key points on how Grant got his start. So go ahead and complete the questions that go with this video and bring some questions for class, and that's it.